The storm wasn't on the forecast when I left Broome, and by the time I saw the wall of black rolling in from the Timor Sea, I was already 200 kilometers inland with nowhere to put down but Spinifex and Ironstone. I've been flying light aircraft for 42 years. Flew charter in Papua New Guinea in the 80s, crop dusters over the wheat belt, mail runs to stations so remote they didn't have names on the map. Retired 3 years back, bought myself a Cessna 182, and told my daughter I'd finally slow down. I lied. The squall line hit like a fist at 500 feet. 1 second I had clear air, and the Kimberley Plateau spread out in rust and gold beneath me. The next I was inside a grey nothing, with rain hammering the windscreen so hard I couldn't see the prop. The Cessna pitched hard left. I corrected, felt the stick go soft, pulled back, and the whole aircraft shuddered like it wanted to come apart. Wind shear. I'd flown through worse, but not in a single-engine plane over country, with no roads and no clearings. The altimeter unwound fast. I throttled up, got nothing but a cough from the engine, and realized I'd sucked water into the intake. The stall warning screamed. I had maybe 10 seconds to pick a line, and all I saw below was a blur of red dirt and the dark smudge of trees. I aimed for the open patch and braced. The impact folded time. One moment I was pulling the nose up, trying to bleed off speed, the next I was upside down, with my head against the side window and the taste of blood in my mouth. The engine had quit, rain pounded the fuselage like fists on sheet metal. I hung there in the harness, ears ringing, and tried to move my right arm. It worked. Left arm, same. Legs responded when I told them to, but when I tried to draw a full breath, something in my ribs shifted, and the pain was so sharp, I nearly blacked out again. I forced myself to stay still and take inventory. Harness release was jammed, but I got it open on the third try and dropped sideways onto the roof lining. The impact had caved in the windscreen on the left side, spiderwebbed the right, and bent the frame enough that the door wouldn't open. I kicked it twice, felt another stab in my ribs and kicked it again. It gave. I crawled out into mud and rain and lay there on my back while the storm tore overhead. The Cessna had come down nose first, in a narrow clearing between stands of woolly butt and bloodwood. The prop was buried. One wing had sheared off and lay crumpled 15 meters back along the scar I'd plowed through the scrub. The other wing was intact, but canted at an angle that made the whole wreck look like a broken bird. I stayed on the ground until the rain eased enough to see more than 10 meters. My ribs were on fire every time I breathed. I pressed my hand against the right side of my chest and felt the spongy give of something broken underneath. Not good, but I was conscious I could move, and I wasn't spurting blood anywhere I could see. I got to my destra knees, then to my feet, leaning hard against the fuselage. The storm had dropped the temperature 20 degrees and my shirt was soaked through. I shivered. Shock, maybe, or just the cold. I opened the baggage compartment behind the seats and pulled out the emergency kit. 2 liters of water in plastic bottles, a foil blanket, a first aid pouch, a torch, and a handheld VHF radio. I tried the radio first. Dead air. I adjusted the frequency, keyed the mic, called Mayday 3 times, and got nothing but static. The battery indicator showed half charge, but out here that meant nothing if I was too far from a repeater or if the antenna had sheared off in the crash. I clipped the radio to my belt anyway and dragged the rest of the kit clear of the wreck. The sun was setting. I could see it now through the breaking clouds, a hard orange line bleeding into the western horizon. I checked my watch. 1,847 hours. I'd filed a flight plan from Broome to Kununurra, visual flight rules, estimated time en route 2 hours 40. I should have landed at 16:20. Someone would notice I hadn't arrived. Someone would call it in. But the storm had pushed me east, maybe north, and I'd been trying to navigate by dead reckoning through cloud for the last 20 minutes before I went down. I had no idea where I was, and neither would anyone else. I limped back to the cockpit and leaned in through the open door. The GPS unit had torn loose from the panel and hung by its wiring. The screen was black. I tried the avionics master switch. Nothing. Battery was likely shorted, or the whole electrical system had died on impact. I pulled the flight log from the side pocket where I always kept it, flipped it open, and checked the last entry I'd made before the storm hit. Position: 17 degrees 43, south, 127 degrees 12, east. Altitude: 500 feet. Course: 095 true. That put me somewhere over the upper plateau, south of the Gib River Road, maybe 80 kilometers from where I should have been. I had no way to update that position, no way to call it in, and no way to know how far the wind had pushed me after I lost power. I closed the log and tucked it into my shirt pocket. The pain in my ribs flared again, and I had to sit down on the wing root and breathe through it. Shallow breaths, slow. When I could think straight again, I looked around. The clearing was maybe 50 meters across, choked with spinifex and low scrub. The trees around the edges were thick enough that I couldn't see more than 20 meters into the bush in any direction. No roads, no tracks, no signs of human presence at all. Just red dirt, gray-green scrub and the smell of wet eucalyptus. I was alive. That was more than I'd expected 2 minutes after the engine quit, but I was a long way from anywhere, with broken ribs, no comms, and no idea when, or if, anyone would find me. I opened one of the water bottles and took a single mouthful. It was warm and tasted like plastic, but I forced myself to cap it again and put it back in the kit. 2 liters. Maybe 3 days if I was careful. Maybe less in this heat once the sun came back. I'd stayed alive this long by not making stupid decisions, and the first smart decision now was to stay with the wreck. Search and rescue would follow my flight plan, then expand the search area when they didn't find me on the track. Aircraft wreckage was visible from the air. A man on foot in the scrub was not. I pulled the foil blanket from the kit, wrapped it around my shoulders, and sat with my back against the fuselage as the last of the daylight bled away. The sky cleared fast after the storm, the way it does up here, and the stars came out hard and bright. I could see the Southern Cross low on the horizon, Scorpius overhead. I used to point them out to my daughter when she was small, back when she still thought flying was magic and not the thing that kept me away from home. She was getting married in 3 weeks. I'd promised I'd be there. I'd promised a lot of things. The temperature dropped. I closed my eyes and listened to the bush settle into night. Somewhere in the distance, a dingo howled. Another answered, closer. I opened my eyes and stared into the dark between the trees. I didn't sleep. The dingoes kept their distance, but I could hear them moving through the scrub, circling wide around the clearing. Every now and then one would call, and another would answer, closer than I wanted them to be. I kept the torch in my hand and the knife from the survival kit unfolded on my lap. The pain in my ribs was constant now, a deep ache that spiked every time I shifted position or drew too deep a breath. I kept the foil blanket pulled tight and tried to stay still. Dawn came slow and gray. The sky turned from black to charcoal to the color of old slate, and the scrub emerged from the dark in stages. The dingoes stopped calling sometime before first light, and the bush went quiet, except for the flies. They arrived with the warmth, dozens of them at first, then hundreds, settling on my face and hands and crawling into the corners of my eyes. I waved them off and they came straight back. I pulled the log from my pocket and opened it to a fresh page. My hand shook a little as I wrote. Knife Day 1. Dawn. No sign of search aircraft overnight. Dingoes nearby but kept clear. Ribs worse. Suspect at least 2 broken, maybe 3. Breathing shallow. No fever yet but expecting infection if puncture wound through skin. Water inventory. 1 bottle opened, 1.8 L remaining. Food. 2 muesli bars, 1 pack of nuts. First aid kit has bandages, antiseptic, painkillers, paracetamol only. Took 2 tabs at 0600. Plan. Stay with wreck. Maintain visibility from air. Rig shade for day. Conserve water. Attempt signal mirror at 1000 and 1400 when sun angle optimal. I closed the log and looked at the Cessna. She was a wreck, but she'd kept me alive. The nose was crumpled where she'd hit, and the prop was gone. Sheared off on impact or torn away when we slewed sideways through the scrub. The wings were intact, still attached, though the left one was canted down where the gear had collapsed. The right wing was high enough that I could use the underside for shade if I rigged something. I got to my feet slowly, testing my balance. The dizziness from yesterday was gone, but the ribs flared hot every time I straightened up. I left the foil blanket on the ground and walked a slow circle around the wreck, looking for anything useful I'd missed in the chaos yesterday. The luggage compartment door was jammed, but I got it open with the knife and pulled out my duffel. 2 shirts, a pair of jeans, socks, a phone charger that was no use to anyone now. At the bottom of the bag I found a cap with a wide brim and put it on. It helped with the flies. I also found a half-empty packet of Tim Tams I'd forgotten about, melted and reset into a solid brown brick. I put them with the rest of the food. By mid-morning, the temperature was pushing 40, and the shade under the right wing wasn't enough. I pulled one of the seat cushions out of the cabin and dragged it under the wing, then used the foil blanket and a length of wire from the cargo tie-downs to rig a lean-to that gave me another meter of coverage. It wasn't much, but it was better than sitting in full sun. I drank another mouthful of water and made myself wait 10 minutes before I capped the bottle again. At 10 o'clock I took the signal mirror from the survival kit and walked out to the center of the clearing. The sky was pale blue and empty. I angled the mirror toward the horizon and swept it slowly east to west, counting to 60 between passes. I did that for 20 minutes, until my arm ached and the glare made my eyes water. Nothing. I went back to the shade and sat down. The pain in my ribs was getting worse. I lifted my shirt carefully and looked at the bruising. It had spread overnight, a dark purple stain across my left side from armpit to hip. There was swelling too, and when I pressed gently just below my ribs, I felt something shift that shouldn't. I pulled my hand back and sat very still until the nausea passed. At 2 in the afternoon, I tried the mirror again. The sky stayed empty. I sat under the wing and opened the log. Dive day 1, 14:30. No aircraft sighted. Signal attempts unsuccessful. Shade rigged. Temperature approx 40 degrees Celsius. Water consumption, 200 milliliters so far today. Injury assessment. Ribs definitely broken. Possible internal bruising. Movement, painful but manageable. Cognitive function normal. Morale fair. I stopped writing and stared at the last line. Morale fair. That was a lie, but it was the kind of lie you told yourself to keep moving. I'd done it 100 times in the cockpit, when the weather turned bad, or the engine started running rough, and you were still 2 hours from the nearest strip. You told yourself it was fine. You told yourself you'd handled worse. You told yourself the numbers would work out if you just kept your head and flew the plane. Most of the time, it was true. I closed the log and looked at the sky. It was empty and blue and endless, and somewhere out there people were looking for me. They had to be. I'd filed a flight plan. I'd logged my departure time. When I didn't arrive at Kununurra by 1600 yesterday, someone would have noticed. They would have called it in. Search and rescue would have started plotting my route, calculating fuel range, marking the most likely search area on a map. But I wasn't in the most likely search area. I was 80 kilometers south of my planned track, in country thick enough that a Cessna could disappear under the canopy and stay hidden for months. I knew the statistics. I'd been flying long enough to know how many aircraft went down in the Outback every year, and how many were never found. I pushed the thought away and focused on what I could control: water, shelter, visibility. I could stay alive long enough for them to find me if I was smart and didn't panic. The sun tracked west, and the temperature eased off. By evening it was almost comfortable, and the flies lifted. I ate half a muesli bar, and allowed myself another 2 mouthfuls of water. My ribs ached constantly now, a deep throbbing pain that spiked every time I moved or breathed too hard. I took 2 more paracetamol and hoped they'd take the edge off. The stars came out again, sharp and bright. I lay on the seat cushion under the wing and tried to find a position that didn't hurt. There wasn't one. I thought about my daughter. She'd be at home now, probably going through seating charts or arguing with the florist, or doing one of the 100 small things that weddings seem to require. She'd called me 2 weeks ago to confirm I was coming, and I'd said yes, of course, I wouldn't miss it. She'd paused, and I'd heard the doubt in her voice. "You said that last time, Dad." Last time had been her graduation. I'd been in Darwin, delayed by weather, and by the time I got a flight south, the ceremony was over. I'd promised her it wouldn't happen again. I'd promised a lot of things over the years, and I'd broken most of them. The dingoes started calling again, somewhere out in the dark. I sat up and reached for the torch. The beam cut a pale tunnel through the night, catching the scrub and the edge of the trees but nothing moving. I kept the light on and the knife close, and told myself they wouldn't come closer. They didn't, but they didn't leave either. I woke to heat and light pressing through my eyelids. The sun was already high, maybe 10 or 11, and the shade under the wing had shifted enough that half my body was exposed. I dragged myself back into the shadow and lay still until the dizziness passed. My mouth tasted like metal and dust. I unscrewed the cap on the last water bottle and allowed myself one swallow. There was maybe half a liter left. Not enough. The paracetamol bottle was empty. I crushed it in my fist and threw it into the scrub, then regretted wasting the energy. My ribs felt worse than yesterday. The pain had spread across my left side and down into my hip, and there was a hot tender spot just below my lowest rib that hadn't been there before. I touched it gently and felt the skin pull tight and warm. Infection, maybe, or just bruising working its way out. Either way, it wasn't good. I pulled the flight log toward me and flipped to a clean page. The pen felt heavy in my hand. Majedi, draft. Okes the race, day 3. Morning dulla Bactus water critical. Half bottle remaining. Majace okes the ray, Majace the raft. Majace the ray. Majace the race, no new aircraft. No signal, ribs worse, tools staying put. I closed the book and set it aside. The ELT was still blinking its useless red light. I switched it off to save the battery, then switched it back on, and told myself it mattered. The day crawled past in waves of heat and silence. I tried the radio again at noon, and got the same static hiss. I tried the sat phone, and got nothing. I checked the signal flare in the survival kit, and confirmed I still had 2 left, then put them back, and promised myself I'd only use them if I heard an engine. By mid-afternoon the heat was unbearable. I dragged the torn section of wing fabric over to the fuselage and rigged it across 2 broken struts to make a wider patch of shade. It helped, but not much. The air was thick and still, and every breath felt like work. I drank another mouthful of water and tried not to think about how little was left. The sun moved west, and the shadows lengthened. I wrote another entry just to keep my hands busy. Nupper die dollar headers. Nupper die dollar headers die dollar. Quart nigh dollar headers. Nupper die dollar headers. Nupper dollar headers. Nupper dollar sumps dime. Nupper died dollar s'afternoon. Dingoes or pigs? Didn't see sumps, fever starting maybe. Hard to tell. I put the pen down and stared at the words. Fever. I hadn't wanted to write it, but ignoring it wouldn't make it go away. My skin felt tight and hot, and my head ached in a way that had nothing to do with dehydration. I lay back and watched the sky turn purple, then black. The dingoes called again, closer this time. I sat up and swept the torch beam across the scrub. 2 sets of eyes flashed green and vanished. I kept the light on and the knife in my lap and waited. They circled for an hour, calling and answering, but they didn't come closer. Eventually the calls faded, and the night went quiet. I dozed in short broken stretches and woke every time the pain spiked. Day 4 started the same. Heat, thirst, pain. I finished the last of the water at sunrise and set the empty bottle aside. My tongue felt thick and my lips were cracked. I knew the signs. Dehydration was setting in fast now, and without water I had maybe another day, 2 at most, before things got serious. I checked the survival kit again and found a small foil pack of water purification tablets, no good without water to purify. I looked up at the sky. It was pale blue and empty, not a cloud in sight, no rain, no chance of rain. I wrote it down because I didn't know what else to do. No Janmedi day 4. Morning, no Janmedi day 4. No rain, no chance of ribs. Pay 2 were a chance of raz. Pay 2 were, no chance of raz. Morning, if anyone finds this, crashed 80 kilometers south of filed plan. Storm pushed me off track. ELT failed. Topus tell Sarah. I tried. I closed the book and left it on the seat. The heat built through the morning and I stopped trying to move. I lay under the rigged shade and focused on breathing. In, out, slow and steady. Don't think about water. Don't think about how far you are from help. Don't think. Sometime after noon I heard my daughter's voice. Dad. Clear and close, just outside the shade. I opened my eyes and turned my head. Nothing. Just scrub and heat haze in the empty sky. Dad, I'm over here. I sat up too fast and the pain knocked the air out of my lungs. I waited for it to pass, then crawled to the edge of the shade and looked out. The voice came from the trees, or maybe from the ridge beyond the trees, I couldn't tell. "Sarah?" My voice cracked and came out barely louder than a whisper. No answer. I grabbed the torch and flicked it on, swept the beam across the scrub even though it was full daylight, and the light was useless. Nothing moved. "Sarah, if you're there, say something." Silence. I sat back and pressed my hands against my face. Hallucination, dehydration playing tricks. I knew that. I'd read about it, heard the stories from other pilots who'd gone down in remote country. The mind starts filling in the gaps when the body shuts down. But knowing didn't make it feel less real. I crawled back under the shade and lay still. The voice came again an hour later, calling from a different direction. I ignored it. It came again at dusk. This time I answered. "I'm sorry, Sarah. I'm sorry I'm not there." The words hung in the still air and faded. No reply. I closed my eyes and let the dark settle over me. Day 5. I didn't bother with the log. My hands were shaking too much to hold the pen, and I wasn't sure I had anything left to say. The fever had spiked overnight, and my skin felt like it was on fire. I lay under the wing and watched the sky spin. Clouds had moved in from the north, low and heavy, the first I'd seen since the crash. I watched them build through the morning, dark bellies swelling, and tried to remember how to hope. By midday the first drops started falling, fat and slow at first, then faster. I dragged myself out from under the wing and tilted my head back. The rain hit my face, and I opened my mouth and let it run over my tongue. It tasted like dust and salt and life. I grabbed the empty water bottle and held it up, watched it fill drop by drop. The rain came harder. I set the bottle down and pulled the torn wing fabric into a funnel, angled it so the water ran into the container. Within 10 minutes I had half a liter. Within 20 I had a full bottle, and a second one filling. I drank until my stomach cramped, then forced myself to stop. The rain kept falling. I sat in it and let it soak through my shirt and wash the dust from my face. For the first time in 5 days I felt something close to relief. Then the pain in my ribs flared hot and sharp, and I doubled over and pressed my hand against my side. The skin was swollen and tight, and when I pulled my shirt up I saw the red streaks spreading outward from the puncture site. Infection, no question now. The fever wasn't breaking. The rain was keeping me alive, but it wasn't going to save me. I crawled back under the wing and reached for the flight log. My hand was shaking so badly I could barely hold the pen, but I forced the words onto the page. MyGov Day 5. Rain, water. Fever worse. MyGov Daiga Heals Daigo, infection spreading. Won't last much longer. Bardo Sarah. I'm sorry, I should have been there. I should have chosen you over the sky. Daiga Belia Cell, Bardo Cell, MyGov Daiga Cell Daiga. MyGov Daiga Feeble. MyGov Daiga Feeble. MyGov Daiga Feeble. MyGov Daiga Feeble AIDS. MyGov Daiga Feeble. I just didn't know how to show it. I closed the book and set it on the seat where someone would find it. Then I lay back and listened to the rain and waited for the fever to take me under. I woke to silence. The rain had stopped and the sky had cleared, and the fever that had been crushing me for 2 days felt lighter, like a weight lifted just enough to let me breathe. I lay still under the wing and tested my body one piece at a time. My head was clear, or clearer than it had been. My ribs still hurt, but the sharp electric pain had dulled to a steady ache. I touched my side and felt the swelling had gone down slightly, the skin still hot but not blazing the way it had been. I sat up slowly and reached for the water bottle, half full. I drank a quarter of it and forced myself to stop, then crawled out from under the wing and stood in the morning light. The scrub looked different after the rain. Greener, softer, like the land had exhaled. Flies were already gathering, but they felt like a small problem now, manageable. I walked a slow circle around the wreckage, testing my legs, and that's when I saw them. Survey markers. 3 of them, half buried in the dirt about 50 meters west of the crash site. Orange plastic tags on steel stakes, faded but unmistakable. I walked closer and crouched beside the nearest one. The tag was stamped with a company logo I didn't recognize, and a date from 15 years back. Mining survey, most likely. I stood and scanned the scrub beyond the markers and saw what I'd missed before, a faint depression in the ground running roughly southwest, parallel to the ridgeline. Not a road, not even a track really, but something human-made. An old access route maybe, cut for equipment and abandoned when the site went dry. I stared at it and felt something shift in my chest. A chance. Small, maybe stupid, but a chance. I walked back to the Cessna and pulled the flight log from the seat. My last entry stared up at me, shaky letters smudged by rain and sweat. Niter. I should have been there. I should have chosen you over the sky. Niter. I read it twice, and then flipped to a clean page. Come tie of day 6. Fever broke overnight. Found survey markers west of wreckage. Old mining track, maybe still passable. Going to try walking it. Can't stay here. Water won't last, and nobody's coming. Pabers noise, Mingruk saus tost, noise me bedekt. Gauze if you're reading, Mingruk saus tost. This, follow the markers southwest. I'll leave a trail if I can. I set the pen down and looked at the coordinates I'd scratched into the instrument panel days ago. They were still legible, carved deep enough that weather wouldn't erase them. I grabbed the water bottle and the emergency poncho from the cargo hold and checked my side one more time. The infection was still there, still angry, but it wasn't spreading the way it had been. I had maybe 2 days before it turned bad again. 2 days to find help or get close enough that someone would see me. I walked back to the survey markers and crouched beside the faint depression in the earth. The track, if that's what it was, ran through low scrub and spinifex, curving around the base of the ridge before disappearing into a stand of ghost gums about a kilometer out. I couldn't see past that, couldn't tell if the track led anywhere or just faded into nothing. But it was movement, and movement was better than waiting. I started walking. The first 100 meters were fine, easy even. The ground was firm and the scrub wasn't too thick and I felt strong enough to keep going. By 200 meters the ribs started catching with every step. By 500 I was breathing hard and the pain was back, sharp and insistent. I stopped and leaned against a termite mound and took a long drink from the bottle. A third gone already. I looked back toward the wreckage and saw it sitting small and silver in the distance, wing glinting in the sun. Still visible, still reachable if I turned back. I looked ahead at the track, and the ghost gums and the ridge rising beyond them. Then I kept walking. The track didn't get easier. It curved and dipped, and in places it vanished entirely, swallowed by spinifex or washed out by old rains. I followed it by instinct more than sight, watching for the faint compression in the dirt or the places where the scrub grew thinner. The sun climbed and the heat pressed down, and the flies came back in clouds. I wrapped the poncho around my head and kept moving. By midday I reached the ghost gums and stopped in the shade. My legs were shaking, and the pain in my ribs had turned to a constant burn. I sat with my back against a tree and drank the last quarter of the bottle. Empty now. I dropped it in the dirt and closed my eyes and listened to my heartbeat thudding in my ears. The track continued past the trees, winding down into a shallow gully choked with paper barks. I couldn't see beyond that, couldn't tell if the gully opened up or just dead-ended into rock. I sat for 10 minutes, maybe 15, and then I stood and started down. The gully was cooler, shaded by the trees, but the ground was loose and uneven, and twice I slipped and had to catch myself against the rocks. The second time I came down hard on my bad side and the pain flared white hot, and I stayed on my hands and knees until my vision cleared. I got up and kept moving. The gully curved south and then west, and then opened into a dry creekbed lined with smooth stones. I followed it for another kilometer, maybe more, and then I saw the drop. The creekbed ended at the edge of a gorge, maybe 15 meters deep, walls steep and red, and slick with moss. I stopped at the edge and looked down. Water pooled at the bottom, dark and still, fed by runoff from the rain, and beyond the pool, barely visible through the sheoaks, I saw something that didn't belong. A fence line. Wire strung between weathered posts, old but intact. I stared at it and felt my chest tighten. A fence meant property. Property meant people, or at least, the memory of them. I looked for a way down and found a rough slope on the northern side. Too steep to walk, but possible if I went slow. I sat at the edge and started sliding, using my heels to brake and my hands to steady myself against the rock. Halfway down my ribs caught again, and I gasped and lost my grip and slid the rest of the way in a shower of loose dirt and stones. I hit the bottom hard and lay there with the wind knocked out of me, staring up at the sky. The pain was everywhere now, sharp and dull and burning all at once. I rolled onto my side and pushed myself to my knees and crawled toward the water. I cupped my hands and drank, the water cold and clean, and then I collapsed beside the pool and closed my eyes. I must have passed out because, when I opened them again, the light had changed, gone soft and orange, and the shadows in the gorge had stretched long and dark. I sat up slowly and looked around. The fence line was still there, maybe 50 meters downstream. I got to my feet and started walking toward it, one step at a time, using the gorge wall for balance. I made it 20 meters before my legs gave out, and I went down again, hard, face first, into the stones. I lay there and tasted blood and dirt and didn't have the strength to move. The sky above me was turning purple now, the first stars beginning to show. I thought about Sarah and the wedding I'd missed and the log sitting in the cockpit with my name and coordinates scratched into metal. I thought about the track and the fence and how close I might be. Then I closed my eyes and let the dark take me. I woke to voices. Not Sarah's this time, but men's voices, low and steady, carrying across water. I opened my eyes and saw sky, pale blue and clean, and the rim of the gorge above me, framing it like a picture. My face was pressed against stone, and my mouth tasted like iron. I tried to move and couldn't. The voices came again, closer now, and I heard boots on rock and the metallic scrape of equipment. I wanted to call out, but my throat was too dry and nothing came. A shadow fell across me and I heard someone swear softly. Here. Down here. More boots, faster now, and then hands on my shoulder, rolling me gently onto my back. A face appeared above me, sunburned and stubbled, wearing a high-vis vest with a station logo I didn't recognize. Mate, can you hear me? I tried to nod and manage something, like a twitch. He turned his head and shouted up toward the rim. He's alive. Get the stretcher down. Another man appeared beside him, younger, carrying a radio. The first man unscrewed a canteen and held it to my lips, and I drank and choked and drank again. Easy, not too fast. I swallowed and found my voice barely. How long? He glanced at the younger bloke and then back at me. How long what? Since the crash. He paused, weighing something. We found your plane 2 days ago. Took us a while to work out you'd walked. 2 days. I tried to do the maths and couldn't. My head felt stuffed with cotton and my ribs screamed every time I breathed. My log. In the cockpit. The older man nodded. We got it. That's how we knew to look for you. Relief washed through me, warm and heavy, and I closed my eyes. My daughter. Sarah. She knows you're alive. Called her from the plane. I felt something break loose in my chest, something that had been clenched tight since the moment I woke in the wreckage. I opened my mouth to say thank you, but nothing came out, and the world tilted sideways and went grey. I came to in a helicopter, strapped to a stretcher with an IV line taped to my arm. A paramedic sat beside me, checking monitors, and through the open door I could see red earth scrolling past below. The noise was enormous, rotor wash and engine roar, and I closed my eyes and let it wash over me. We landed at Kununurra Hospital just before noon. They wheeled me into emergency, and a doctor with tired eyes examined my ribs and ordered scans, and started asking questions I didn't have the energy to answer. Broken ribs, 3 of them, one with a hairline fracture that had nicked the pleura and caused the infection. Dehydration, malnutrition, second-degree burns on my shoulders from the sun. They kept me for 5 days. Sarah flew up on the 3rd day, walked into my room without knocking, and stood at the foot of the bed staring at me. She looked older than I remembered. She'd cut her hair short, and there were lines around her eyes I hadn't seen before. You're an idiot, she said. I nodded. I know. She sat down in the chair beside the bed and folded her arms. They said you walked 2 kilometers with broken ribs and no water. Didn't have much choice. You could have stayed with the plane. They wouldn't have found me. I was too far off the flight plan. She looked at me for a long moment and then shook her head. The wedding was beautiful, by the way. I'm sorry I missed it. You should be. She reached into her bag and pulled out something wrapped in tissue paper and set it on the bedside table. Mum wanted you to have this. I unwrapped it slowly. It was a photo, faded and creased, of the 2 of us standing beside my first Cessna, Sarah maybe 6 years old, grinning gap-toothed in a too big flight jacket. I stared at it, and felt my throat tighten. She said you used to keep it in your wallet. I did, must have lost it somewhere. Sarah leaned back and looked at the ceiling. They found your log, the search coordinator showed it to me. I didn't say anything. You wrote that you regretted missing the wedding. I did. You also wrote that you loved flying more than anything. I turned the photo over in my hands. I wrote a lot of things. She looked at me again, her eyes unreadable. Which one's true? I thought about the storm and the crash, and the days in the wreckage waiting to die. I thought about the fever and the hallucinations, and the moment I decided to walk.
Both, I said finally.
She nodded slowly. That's what I thought. We sat in silence for a while, listening to the beep of monitors and the distant sound of footsteps in the corridor. Then she stood and leaned down and kissed my forehead. Get better, Dad? We'll talk when you're home. She left before I could answer. They discharged me a week later with instructions to rest and a referral to a physio in Perth. The station blokes who'd found me drove me out to see the wreckage before I flew south. The Cessna sat where I'd left it, nose down in the scrub, one wing crumpled, and the tail section twisted at an angle that made my chest hurt, just looking at it. The cockpit was open and empty, instruments dark, and I could see the scratches on the panel where I'd carved my coordinates and apology. The older bloke, his name was Dave, stood beside me, with his arms folded. You're lucky we run cattle in this area, no one else would have been out here for months. I know. Your log saved you. We found the plane but didn't think anyone could have survived until we read it. I nodded. Can I have a minute? Take your time. He walked back to the ute and left me standing in the shade of the broken wing. I climbed into the cockpit carefully, ribs still tender, and sat in the pilot's seat. The smell hit me first, stale sweat and metal, and something faintly chemical. I looked at the panel and the scratches, and the empty space where the log had been. Then I looked out through the cracked windscreen at the scrub and the sky beyond. I thought about the storm, and the moment I'd lost control and the long fall through the dark. I thought about waking at dusk with no signal, and no idea how far I'd strayed. I thought about the days that followed, the heat, and the thirst, and the nights listening to dingoes circle. And I thought about the morning I'd decided to walk, knowing it might kill me but unable to stay still any longer. I sat there for a long time, just breathing, feeling the sun on my face through the broken glass. Then I climbed out and walked back to the ute. Dave started the engine, and we drove away without speaking, the wreckage shrinking in the side mirror, until the scrub swallowed it whole. They gave me my log back before I left Kununurra. I sat in the airport lounge and opened it and read through the entries, my handwriting getting shakier as the days wore on. The last entry was dated Day 7, written in the cockpit before. I'd left to walk. If you're reading this, I'm already gone. Coordinates scratched on the panel. Tell Sarah I'm sorry. I ran my fingers over the words, and then closed the book and slipped it into my bag. The flight south was smooth, no storms, just clear sky, and the long red heart of the country rolling past below. I watched it through the window and thought about all the hours I'd spent up here, chasing horizons, believing I was free. Maybe I had been. Or maybe I'd just been running. When we landed in Perth, Sarah was waiting at the gate. She didn't say anything, just took my bag and walked me to the car. We drove through the city in silence, the afternoon light slanting low between the buildings. She kept her eyes on the road, and I kept mine on the window, watching the streets blur past. When we pulled into her driveway, I recognized the jacaranda out front, bigger than I remembered. She killed the engine and sat there with her hands on the wheel. You want to come in? She asked. If that's all right. It's your daughter's house. Of course it's all right. We went inside and she made tea, and we sat at the kitchen table, the cup warm between my palms. She didn't ask about the crash, or the log, or the months in recovery. She just sat across from me and waited. I'm sorry I wasn't there, I said finally. She nodded slowly. For the wedding. I know. I told myself I'd make the next one. The next big thing. But there was always another job, another flight. She looked down at her tea. You were always going to fly, Dad. I knew that when I was 8. Doesn't make it right. No, but it makes it yours. I turned the cup in my hands and felt the heat seep into my fingers. I wrote about you. In the log. On day 5 when I thought I wasn't getting out. She looked up. What did you write? That I was sorry. That I'd chosen the sky over you and I didn't know how to undo it. Her jaw tightened and she blinked hard. You can't undo it. But you're here now. I am. Then that's where we start. We sat there for a while longer, the light fading outside, and I thought about all the years I'd spent looking down at the world from 10,000 feet. All the towns and roads and rivers I'd flown over, believing distance was the same as freedom. It wasn't. Freedom was sitting at this table, holding my daughter's gaze, and admitting I'd been wrong. She reached across and squeezed my hand once, then let go. "You can stay in the spare room if you want, as long as you need." "I don't want to be a burden." "You're not, you're just my dad." I nodded and felt something loosen in my chest, something I'd been holding tight since the day I woke in the wreckage. That night I unpacked my bag in the small room at the back of the house. The log sat on top of my clothes, the cover worn and stained. I opened it and read through the entries again, slower this time, letting the words settle. The storm, the crash, the days of heat and thirst, the fever, the choice to walk. And the last line, scratched out in a hand I barely recognized. "Tell Sarah, I'm sorry." I picked up a pen from the bedside table and turned to the first blank page after the final entry. I dated it and wrote carefully, my hand steadier now. 3 months later. "I'm still here. Sarah let me stay and we're finding our way back, one day at a time. I don't know if I'll fly again. Part of me wants to, part of me knows I shouldn't, but I know this now. The sky isn't freedom if it costs you everything on the ground." I closed the log and set it on the table and lay back on the bed, listening to the sound of the city through the window. It was nothing like the Kimberley. No wind through Spinifex, no dingoes, no endless red. Just cars and voices, and the low hum of life going on around me. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the need to run from it. The months that followed were quiet. I helped Sarah around the house, fixed the back fence, painted the spare room. Small things. The kind I'd always been too busy for. Some days were harder than others. My ribs ached when the weather turned, and I still woke at night sometimes, sweating, convinced I was back in the cockpit with the altimeter spinning down. But Sarah was patient. She didn't push, she just let me be there. One afternoon in late spring she found me in the garage, sorting through a box of old flight maps. "You thinking about going back up?" she asked. "I don't know, maybe." "Would it be the same?" I folded one of the maps and set it aside. "No, I don't think it could be." "Then why do it?" "Because it's the only thing I ever knew how to do." She leaned against the doorframe and crossed her arms. "That's not true. You're learning something new right now." "What's that?" "How to stay." I looked at her and saw her mother in the set of her mouth, the way she held herself when she was right about something and wouldn't back down. "Yeah," I said, "I reckon I am." She smiled, just a little, and then went back inside. I stayed in the garage for another hour, going through the maps, remembering the routes I'd flown and the places I'd seen. But when I closed the box and carried it back to the shelf, I didn't feel the pull I used to. The sky was still there, it always would be, but it didn't own me anymore. 6 months after the crash, I got a call from Dave, the recovery coordinator. He was in Perth for a conference and wanted to meet for a beer. We sat outside a pub in Fremantle, the afternoon sun warm on the pavement. "You look better," he said. "I feel better." "Ribs healed?" "Mostly, still catch me on a cold morning." He nodded and took a sip of his beer. "I wanted to tell you something. About the log." "Yeah?" "We used it for a training case, showed it to new search crews. How to read what's left behind, how to follow the breadcrumbs." I set my glass down carefully. "You're serious. Dead serious. Your log saved your life, but it's gonna save others too. You documented everything. Crash site, condition, decision to move, coordinates. Textbook survival communication." I didn't know what to say to that. I just wrote what I thought someone would need to know. That's exactly what made it work. We sat in silence for a while, watching people walk past on the footpath. "You going to fly again?" he asked. "I don't know. I think about it." "You should. Bloke who can survive 7 days in the Kimberley with broken ribs isn't done yet." "Maybe. But if I do, it won't be the same." "Good, it shouldn't be." We finished our beers and shook hands, and he drove off toward the city. I walked back to Sarah's house slowly, letting the evening settle around me. When I got home, she was in the kitchen making dinner. "How was Dave?" she asked. "Good. He told me they're using my log for training." She glanced over her shoulder. "That's something." "Yeah, it is." I sat at the table and watched her work, the familiar rhythm of chopping and stirring. "I've been thinking," I said. About maybe teaching. Ground school, navigation, survival prep, things I know." She stopped and turned to face me. "You'd be good at that. You think?" "I know." I nodded and felt the last piece of weight lift off my chest. "All right then. I'll look into it." She smiled and went back to the stove, and I sat there in the warmth of her kitchen, listening to the sounds of home. If you've ever flown over the Kimberley at dawn, you know how the land looks from up there, endless, red, unforgiving. But you don't know what it feels like to be down in it, alone, with nothing but your wits and a flight log. I do now. And I know this too, the sky will always call, but the ground is where you find out who you are. Hit like and subscribe. More stories are coming.